Is Scott Frost contract bad? A lot of people are talking. I'm going to give my thoughts today. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I'm your host, Sean Green. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really, really do appreciate it. Like we said, over the last couple weeks, the offseason can be rough sometimes. A lot of news cannot come out, and it can be slow news weeks. This was technically not one of them because we've got something that we've been waiting for a while now. And when I say a while, I mean since Scott Frost was hired. A lot of the people that I know had requested the Scott Frost contract since he got hired, and we just got it this week. So we're going to kind of go through. I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. But first, please subscribe. Please like the video. We have a lot cooking on the Charge On channel. Not going to lie. Obviously, we have the one podcast a week right now that we're posting, but we've got some behind-the-scenes stuff that we are working on that I think is going to excite a lot of people. I know I keep saying it. I've said it the last week or so, and you won't know until you see it. But, you know, over the next month or so, you'll start seeing some motion on the channel. And I implore all of you to kind of, again, subscribe, become a member. Become a member of the channel. You get videos a little bit earlier than everybody else, and channel members are going to be very important for the channel moving forward. So I would implore all of you, if you are not, go be a channel member on the YouTube page. And for our audio listeners, keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate you as well listening through audio form. But without further ado, let's get to the Scott Frost contract. Now, originally, there was a lot of uproar over the contract because of the the bonus year that everybody was talking about. And it later got justified about the bonus year, and we're going to get into it. But I want to give my original kind of just thought process on coaching contracts. And it might be boring for some, but I think with the Gus Malzahn contract and the uproar around it, UCF got saved by Gus Malzahn going to Florida State for nothing. Like, UCF got really lucky. From everything I had heard the entirety of last season, there was talks about not being happy with Gus, potentially wanting out on Gus, potentially having negotiations to have a lesser buyout than whatever the buyout was for Gus, because UCF didn't want to pay the entirety of the Gus buyout, right? And I think as the season went along, you kind of saw how things were going, but UCF does not want to pay coach buyouts. They don't. Like, there's a reason that Satia Messer is still the head women's basketball coach. There's a reason that Johnny Dawkins is continuing to be the head men's basketball coach. Now, granted, I like Johnny Dawkins. I think he does more with less than any coach, probably more than most coaches in the country. So I don't think Johnny Dawkins, that's a shocker. The Satia Messer, if UCF was really wanting to go hard at UCF women's basketball, and I don't really blame Satia Messer. I know this is going off on a tangent, but I don't blame Satia Messer as much as most people will. At the end of the day, UCF is not investing in women's basketball, so you can't expect Satia Messer to go out and put a top 5 roster in the Big 12 on the court. It's been really bad, but you can't expect her to do it when the resources just aren't there. Same thing with Coach Dawkins. At the end of the day, the resources aren't there for Coach Dawkins to have a Big 12 championship level basketball program. So when it comes to the football aspect, UCF is putting all of their resources, all of their capital basically into football. And when Gus Malzahn was having the year he was having last year, UCF didn't want to have to pay that buyout. And that's why we were saying, like, ultimately, we wouldn't have been surprised if Gus Malzahn was the coach for another year. They had just given Gus the contract extension. That was something that I think a lot of people questioned. Like, did Gus Malzahn deserve an extra year for going 6-6 in his first season in the Big 12? Or 6-7, technically. I think a lot of people, me included, said, listen, that was a successful first year. but it's about what you do in the next year. And look what happened in the next year. You look back and you say that was a bad move to give the coach a contract extension. Gus Malzahn going to Florida State saved UCF from a really bad financial situation. They would have told Gus, listen, we want to buy you out. Gus would say, fine, buy me out. And UCF's like, I don't want to pay that number. Let's lower it. And for Gus, why would he want it lower? So I think fans are a little, not scared, but I think fans are now aware that there's a chance, there's a 50-50 chance that the coach that you hire will not work out. So just like any contract with any sport, fans want the team to be protected in case something goes wrong. I think of, the Orlando Magic. And I'm giving a lot of examples. I'm just setting it all up for you guys so you kind of understand the thought process. If you look at the Orlando Magic, right? Orlando Magic fans applaud Jeff Weltman and the Orlando Magic for really having team-friendly deals and the players accepting team-friendly deals. So fans believe, which, it's to their point, that the team can get out of any contract whenever they want because the deals are so team-friendly and the players are accepting those team-friendly deals that it's going to be fine for the club. When it comes to college football, at the end of the day, coaches' contracts are a majority of what you're paying besides player, NIL deals, right? NIL deals take the cake, but coaches' contracts are very hard to get out of. And if you don't make the right hires, that bill can really add up. You see it with some college football programs across the country. Some programs make the wrong hire, and it takes them years because, now granted, if they have insane capital and they can just pay coach buyouts all the time, who cares? Nebraska, for example. They pay Scott Frost, then they can go get a Matt Rule, pay him at the same time. You look at Auburn. They fire Gus Malzahn. Now they got Hugh Freeze, but they had to go through a couple coaches until they got to Hugh Freeze after Gus. So you don't want to have to be in a situation where you are paying multiple coaches or paying one coach while also paying your sitting head coach. And that's why Gus Malzahn going to Florida State saved UCF from a bad financial situation. Coming up this year, UCF will be getting a full share of their Big 12 revenue, which I think will help them. But let's get into the Scott Frost deal. I think a lot of people assumed, and this is where, when Scott Frost got hired, I think a lot of UCF fans that didn't like the hire said UCF is going cheap. They got Scott Frost for cheap. Scott Frost obviously didn't have a good career at Nebraska in the coaching realm, has been out of the coaching college football for a couple years. So UCF went the cheap route to save a little bit of money, bring their, the golden egg back home, and you kill two birds with one stone, right? You get Scott Frost back, and you get him on the cheap. So when it got announced that he was getting paid 5 years, $22.1 million, I think a lot of fans were shocked. They widened those eyes, and they said, huh? What do you mean $22.1 million? Huh? Let's go through it. In 25-26, so this upcoming season, Scott Frost is making $3.9 million, right? Now, this is where I was more, not shocked, but to see the breakdown, or not the breakdown, but the incremental raising to get to the $22.1 million. Because if I'm a UCF fan, or if I'm a person that covers UCF, especially the football team, that's what this podcast is, I would have rather had all this flipped. And you'll see. This year, $3.9 million. Next season, the 26-27 season, $4.1 million. I think it's $4,150,000. 2027-2028 season, $4.4 million. 28-29, $4,650,000. 29-30 season, $5 million. So every year, Scott Frost gets just a little bit more money each year. Now, that makes sense. I think a lot of coaches' contracts are like that. If you are staying for the fifth year And this is understandable. If you're making it to the 2029-2030 season, you should be making more than what you made in the 2025-2026 season. But I think there was a give and take here. I think it was either A, UCF was going to pay a little bit less than normal for Scott Frost, given everything that's gone on around his coaching time at Nebraska and after. Or B, it would be more of a declining contract, maybe incentivize the bonuses later in the contract to make up for maybe not having to pay as much. Neither happened. Scott Frost gets more money each year, which I understand. And he's getting paid in terms of college football coaches. He's, I think, in the top 40 of coaching contracts. Now, the 6th year. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let me tell you my thoughts on just the number. I don't mind the number. I don't mind the number that you're paying him. The issue is if this doesn't work, and listen, I'm an optimist right now. When Scott Frost got hired, we said my thoughts. I said I wasn't a huge fan of the hire because nostalgia hires rarely work. But then you hear him speak and you see the vision and you hear how he wants to build it, and he got me turned immediately. I said, I'm on board. I'm ready to see it. I believe that he could turn the program around. But you always had that little inkling in the back of your head of, can this really work? And if it doesn't, is UCF in a good position? At the end of the day, it's not that this is a hard contract to get out of, but it's just as hard as if it was Gus Malzahn. He's getting paid basically the same amount that Gus Malzahn is making. They replaced Gus Malzahn's contract and just gave it to Scott Frost. Now, I think with West Virginia, you could see like Rich Rod makes less annual salary, but has way more in bonuses. So that's where this contract differs, where Scott Frost makes more in annual salary, but his bonuses are not as, they're unique. They're not as big. The bonuses in 2025-2026, $500,000. So you can only make an additional $500,000 in bonuses this year. And then each year it goes up about $100,000. It gets as high as $800,000, but if he gets that bonus year, it goes to $900,000 for that bonus year. But the bonuses only get to $800,000, and that only happens in the 2028-2029 season. So he's getting more annual salary, less in bonus. I think ultimately this is the contract you were going to get regardless. I think fans going into it that are mad about the contract and scared, not because they think Scott Frost is going to get fired after a year, but I think they were assuming UCF was just going to lowball Scott Frost because they were trying to get their books in order and they were going to go cheap and they were going to rake in a bunch of extra money. It's not the case. Scott Frost was going to command whatever average salary UCF was going to pay. And the average salary that they were going to pay was what they were paying Gus Malzahn last year. The only reason you got Scott Frost is because Gus Malzahn left not requiring a single dollar. So to UCF's benefit, that worked. And they believe Scott Frost is the guy. So if you believe he is ultimately the guy, you wouldn't lowball the person that you believe is going to turn the program around. And technically, again, in terms of Power 4 coaching, this is a very reasonable contract. Now, we can get into a wider conversation about, for UCF moving forward, does UCF have the capital to compete? Does UCF have the capital? And we'll talk about that next week, because I think it is very interesting. Brett Yormark's comments or the Big 12 comments that have come out that there are some schools that just won't be able to afford what the Big 12 is needing them to be able to afford. To pay the annual fee, basically, after the House settlement. UCF is going to do it, but can UCF afford to do it? And that's a greater question. I don't know. I don't know if UCF can afford it. But let's quickly talk about the 6th year. Because originally, like I said, a lot of people assume that the 6th year was if Scott Frost made a bowl game at any point in his tenure, he would automatically get a 6th year. I saw one tweet saying, so by this logic, Scott Frost can go 0-12, 0-12, 0-12, 0-12, and 6-6, and then he would automatically get another year, which I found very funny. But the 6th year is only eligible if he goes to a bowl game in the 1st year, which I really actually love. Because all of the UCF fans and everybody in the college football world do not believe that UCF will be a bowl team this year. UCF fans are optimistic. I think UCF fans are looking at it like we could go 6-6 in the 1st year. But I want to preface this by saying I've seen the team. We haven't seen them against an opponent. We've seen the influx of new players. If Scott Frost and his staff bring UCF to a bowl game in the 1st year with the schedule that they have, he deserves an extra year. He doesn't deserve a contract extension. He deserves an extra year. The way you have to look at this season that is coming up, as lights go off, that'll come up in a second. The way you have to look at this 1st year with Scott Frost, this is a development buffer year. They're going to try and win every game. They're going to try and go to the Big 12 championship. That's a given. When you play a sport like college football and any professional sport, your goal is to make it to the final game. But with that being said, and I know fans don't want to hear this year is a buffer year until next year. They're going to see who they like. They brought in a bunch of guys. They hope that they can mess around and win a bunch of games. But ultimately, this year is to build the foundation for Scott Frost and his vision moving forward for the program. When Scott Frost came in 2016, that team was at the bottom of the barrel of college football. Nobody expected in that 2nd year for them to go to a bowl game, or the 1st year for him to go to a bowl game, and they went to a bowl game. But nobody thought in the next year the expectation was to go 12-0 and go to the American Championship. The expectation was probably just take that next step. Because of this, history, the expectations are up here when we really need to lower them down to here. We're at different points in the tenure. And I think you need to look at Scott Frost like it is a clean slate. This is not, there's very talented guys on the roster. And I am on record saying that I do believe that Scott Frost will get this team to a bowl game. I think there's enough talent to get to 6 wins, at least, with this roster. But if he goes to a bowl game this year, he does deserve that extra year. He does. And I think next year would then be the start of a 5-year deal where you look at it and you say, okay, where can you take this program? And then putting that in the contract tells me that they all don't think necessarily a bowl game is realistic. That's an incentive. The extra year is an incentive because they don't believe that it is the most realistic thing. We might think it might be realistic, but they put it in the contract as like a, hey, you do this, we'll give you an extra year right off the bat. If he doesn't, it's not like it hurts him. It's just saying, hey, you didn't do it. It's fine. You got 4 years to kind of turn the program around still. This 1st year was that buffer. It's a win-win. He still would have 4 years on his contract after. And if he goes to the bowl game, great. He has basically a 6-year contract. So I think fans need to have the expectation and not get... I understand there's a lot of fans that are happy about the contract and don't care. But I saw a lot this past week of fans not exactly thrilled about what the contract entails. I think if you look at it that way, you're setting yourself up for failure. You have to, again, if you view this year as it's not going to be great, everything else after is going to be fun. If the team's great, if the team's fun to watch, which I think they will be. I think it's going to be a fun year. But with this contract specifically, I think it is designed to have Scott Frost live up to the hype in the first year, but not so much that they are banking on it. I think if anything, they're not banking on it, which is why they put it in there, almost to not push Scott Frost anymore, not to say, hey, here you go. I think it's, again, strictly, they don't think it's the most realistic thing, but if he does it, then they'll be ahead of schedule. UCF will then be ahead of schedule in their eyes. So, I don't mind the contract. 20 minutes to tell you I don't mind the contract. The buyout, actually. Buyout is 75% of the guaranteed compensation. So, that's a lot of money. And that's why I do want to implore UCF fans that Scott Frost is going to get at minimum 3 years, which he should anyway. Like, let's get it straight. Scott Frost should get at minimum 3 years to turn around anyway. But this is going to be at least your coach for the next 4 years. Unless something drastic happens. Unless they're only winning 2 to 3 games a season for the next 2 years. Then there's most likely going to be a large question going into that third year. But you need to give it time. And I know UCF fans don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Obviously, I want UCF to hit the ground running and win a bunch of games early. But you want to see him build it out so you don't have to buy out another coach. Even though you didn't have to buy out Gus Malzahn, which was good for them. But you don't want to have to buy out a coach and go on another search. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for Charge On. We're going to see what happens in the next couple days. On3 did come out with something today. Maybe I can pull it up while I'm on here. But kind of talking about the new college football playoff. We'll probably talk about this on next week's episode if it ultimately does happen. I'm going to mention it here. According to Ross Dellinger, a 16-team college football playoff bracket is gaining support in the Big Ten and SEC. Let me re-say that. It's gaining support in the Big Ten and SEC. It's not gaining support with the Big 12 and ACC. But the bids would be 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big 12, 2 for the ACC, and 2 for the Big 12, 1 group of 6, and 3 at-large bids. So that is something that we will talk about next week because it does factor in for UCF, and it factors in for the Big 12. It 100% factors in. So we will talk about that next week if it seems like that picks up any traction over the next 72 hours. But as we know, whenever stuff gets reported that the SEC and the Big Ten are leaning towards something, it usually doesn't take a long time for the Big 12 or the ACC to come back behind and be like, we don't like this. So we will talk about it next week, and we've got some other stuff we want to talk about to you as well. So be on the lookout for that. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly appreciate it. This has been Charge On. We will see you next week.